Hello everybody and welcome to Rather Based Reviews, and today I'm looking at Robo Terror. Robo Terror is a 2D platform shooter developed by Alex Game Dev and published by Garage Games on the 4th of July 2020, at least according to its Steam storefront page. And before we get into it, let's take a quick peek at the various biases that will most likely exist in this review. I came across this game while browsing new releases on Steam, and I purchased it on the 4th of July 2020 expressly with the intentions of reviewing this game. At the time I purchased the game, it was on sale and priced at 40 cents in euros or 50 cents in US dollars, but usually retails for €2.39 or $3 US. Going into this game, I know nothing about it and only took a quick peek into the developer, showing that Alex Game Dev has a list of various 2D and 2.5D games due to come out within a short period of each other. Rather interesting, I'll admit, but I'm not going to look into it much more than that. The publisher, Garage Games, appears to be a publisher which specializes in 2D games. Another bias worth being aware of is my lack of knowledge of 2D platform shooters, so I'm going to take the approach of a more naive player. Maybe after I've done more reviews in the future this will change, but until then, at least be aware of that. And with that, let's get into it. The Steam library image didn't look the most appealing starting out after purchasing the game. The game itself is small enough to download at around 80 megabytes. The game appears on the surface to have a minimum spec list that is adequate for what it is. The game starts off blaringly loud. Truly, CSGO would be proud. It doesn't even display an option on the main menu to mute, though in the pause menu when you're in-game it actually does, so that's interesting. Starting the game, we are presented with a decent set of city backgrounds, which belie that might be a beautiful sprite game. For all, the actual level geometry is just various shades of concrete. Save the backgrounds, the presentation of the game is extremely drab. The enemies and player do have some creativity put into them, but they're not very unique. They're all just various forms of grey and red cyborg. The HUD elements are tiny and are pushed away into the corner where you can barely see them. I frequently found myself losing track of them during gameplay. There's a rudimentary story listed in the description on the Steam store page, which is pretty much irrelevant when playing the game. It describes the main character Kyle Connor, and robots rebelling against humanity. Sounds rather familiar, but when you beat the game, the credits roll to give you the great news that Roman has saved his wife and lived happily ever after. What? The controls are extremely snappy and light, and the character feels like it has little weight. Due to the extremely basic level design, this rarely becomes an issue except for some minor platforming, as the platforms that move around can feel way too small and jumping onto them feels rather hazardous. I've had occasions where I got stuck for a bit because I couldn't land the jumps on the small platforms, but that might just be my innate lack of skill. The level restarts from the beginning if you die, and there are no checkpoints, save for the start of the next level. Your main character has three main weapons: the pistol, which fires slow individual shots, the machine gun that rapid fires, and the shotgun that shoots a small spread of shots. While the shotgun has close range use, if you get too close to an enemy, your shots simply pass right through them. The pistol and the machine gun are mostly the same. While there's maybe a difference in damage, it's not particularly noticeable. The only real distinction between the two is that the pistol has infinite ammo, and given how rare ammo drops are, that being 2 or 3 per level, you'll spend most of your time using the pistol if you stop to kill every enemy. This, combined with no cover from enemy fire, makes the combat loop, if you can call it that, feel extremely dull and boring. Most firefights aren't interesting as the only way to dodge is just by jumping. Aiming with the mouse can be a bit difficult to get used to, especially when you're jumping lots, but nothing thoroughly offensive there. While the grenades are also another weapon, due to the nature of explosions in this game, something we'll get into shortly, combined with the frankly bizarre physics of the grenade, like seriously, what is it doing? Bounces make grenades often more of a hazard to yourself to throw. The enemies are dispersed so much throughout levels that you're only gonna kill a single one with a grenade, so it's not worth using a single grenade to take out an enemy. As a result, I rarely ended up using grenades throughout the playthrough. The enemies of Robo Terror have some of the worst AI I have ever seen. They have literally one behavior. Once the player gets close enough to activate the AI, it charges at you while shooting, often to its own detriment, as this leads to it falling off the edge and either dying or being unable to reach the player. Even though the game boasts randomly generated enemies, what this actually means is that there are 6 different enemy types that get randomly replaced every time you start the level. There is effectively no difference between these enemies. While they might have slightly different amounts of health, it's not enough for me to really notice and differentiate the various enemies. They all have the same attacks, that being single pistol shots, and behavior, which makes them all the same really. They don't feel any different. They don't even do that much damage. I only died once or twice to getting shot to death by the enemies directly. There are 3 bosses in this game, one being decent, and the other 2 being annoying. Bosses make their appearance at the end of a specific level, meaning that if you die to the boss, you have to replay the whole level again. This, as you can imagine, is somewhat annoying. Boss 1 and Boss 2 use explosive-based weapons, so it's time to discuss the most infuriating gameplay element of this game, explosions. From what I'm able to tell, judged on my own experience of it, when an explosion happens, there's a hitbox, with some smaller hitboxes that randomly spurt out. These linger a bit, so they can be annoying to dodge, especially since a single hit from an explosion will one-shot you, meaning that if the bosses land a single hit, you're back to the start of the level. Given that these 2 bosses are on effectively flat ground, with no cover, this adds even more difficulty, and given the random nature of how their shots go, I've had occasions where I walked up to the boss and immediately got shot by an explosive and died. Ironically, all of these issues, if there was even a pre-boss checkpoint, this would be far less infuriating. All these, ironically, are avoided by the last boss, boss number 3. This boss is a robot that fires a laser machine gun. This one doesn't one-shot you, it can be avoided by crouching. You get elevated platforms to stand on while shooting, and on top of that, the level starts up just in front of the boss, so deaths mean you can quickly get back to the boss. The third boss only took a handful of tries, while the first 2 probably took me hours on end. Robo Terror is the kind of game where the developer tries to cover up their bad game design or laziness by claiming that it is difficult or hardcore. The goal of the game is to really just go as far right as you can until you hit the trigger to load the next level. The levels themselves are bland and uninspired in design. The enemies are often placed lazily by themselves. You can often see an enemy on screen before they see you, so you can shoot them without them even reacting. The levels often feature gaps that you're unsure whether they are bottomless pits, where you're required to go, or Easter eggs. When death equals a level restart, this can be very annoying when you're given no indication beforehand. The decoration of levels is very boring and uninspired. It's literally just a couple of occasional neon signs. And now we come to the explosive barrels. These red barrels are dotted throughout the levels and explode when fired upon. While at first you might think these barrels provide an interesting way of outsmarting an AI by blowing them up, these barrels are used far too frequently on later levels, to the point where enemies are being placed on top of the barrels, and they shoot as soon as they see you, so they end up blowing themselves up immediately. This is a more common occurrence than you might think, and it gets rather annoying. As the game goes further and further on, the closest thing to having fun in the game, that is, being not outright bored, was speeding through the level, occasionally popping enemies with a shotgun. The barrels become hazards seemingly designed to discourage you from speeding through, as a single wayward shot can just end your run and your close twinge of amusement. While of course the solution to that is to slowly take your time and progress through the level, there's not much fun to be found in that, at least for me, versus the slight thrill that comes from darting through various enemies, leaving some alive and taking some down. Robo Terror represents the bare minimum needed to make a game presentable on a storefront. You can play the game without noticing issues. It doesn't crash incessantly, but when you start looking for issues, you'll find them. From simple ones like holes in the world, and enemies falling to their deaths from some ledges, and not others, using a shotgun on the item boxes produces 5 items instead of 1. Alongside this, replaying the tutorial mission while in the middle of a campaign completes the campaign level that you're currently on, and once you complete the game, you're locked from playing any level except for the tutorial. If you try to continue, it will soft lock you, and if you try to complete the tutorial, you just get stuck at this fade. So, in conclusion, is Robo Terror worth 50 cents? It's not much. The game only really lasts 2 hours, as it says there's only 20 levels, and provided you don't get stuck on the bosses. The main issue with Robo Terror is that there's absolutely nothing that makes me want to recommend it. It just simply is a game. I'd recommend saving your money for something else. As a rating, I'd have to give Robo Terror a 3 out of 10. So yeah, thanks for watching. Subscribe for more reviews of stuff, and bye.